Hey, welcome back to this Europass Teacher Talk with Susan Galliano. I'm very happy to be here. And today we are going to talk about universal design for learning, which involves a very interesting framework with lots of guidelines that can help us create learning environments that are going to be as inclusive as we possibly can make them from the very beginning. And while people are coming in to join me on this live, I want to say welcome on this Tuesday. We're right on the verge of spring here in Florence, Italy. And let me know where you are joining us from. What countries are you hailing from? And what do you teach? What age are your learners? I am this week working with a really interesting group of educators, and we are working on conflict management. And we were talking about a lot of the things that we did in our live from last month. And it's been really interesting working with teachers from Estonia, from Portugal, from Spain, from Germany, and we're having a great time. And so just let me know where you're coming from. And I would, and if there are any friends watching, any teachers who have been to any of my courses, just let me know you're here so we can say hi. And before I jump in to these different concepts of UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, I was curious to know if is this something that you have ever heard about? Is it something that's talked about in your school? Because UDL has been developed, it's been in practice for a couple of decades now. There are lots of pros, there are a few cons, and we will also discuss them. Or more than cons, we might say some challenges to using it, but I think today we'll be able to come away with a clearer sense of how we can bring these to our learning environments in ways that are sustainable for us teachers, because we know that we have a lot on our plate. We have a lot of different hats that we're wearing. And so hopefully UDL actually becomes something that can assist us. Now, when we talk about UDL, the very first thing that we want to consider is we want to consider our professional role as educators. Do you think of yourself as a teacher, or do you think of yourself a bit more as a designer? And what is the difference between the two? When you think of the word teacher, what words come to mind? And please feel free to write in the comment section what the word teacher makes you think of. And if instead you think of yourself a bit more as a designer, what words come to mind when you think of designing your learning environment? Does this elicit a different kind of emotion? Does it make you nervous? Does it make you actually a bit curious? And this is what I'm going to invite you to think about in this live together, because I think that in putting on our designer hat, we can imagine scenarios and we can attempt to create lessons that from the very start are going to be universally inclusive, which means that we're going to be able to garner the interest and the curiosity of as many learners as possible. Now, let's think about what we are using right now. Right now, I am using YouTube, and this is a live that will also be recorded, and the recording will be able to stay in the Europass video library for people to watch as many times as they want, if they want to. And the whole point here is that just using this is an example of universally designed learning. And in what way do I mean that? Okay, so here on YouTube, what are all of the different possibilities that we have? All right, first off, this gives me the possibility to reach as many learners as people who have access to the internet. And this is something that's very different compared to just 20, 25 years ago. Here on YouTube, you can listen to my words if you prefer auditory information. You can observe my facial expressions and, to a certain degree, my body language. You can read my lips if for people who might have a bit of difficulty with their hearing. You can also slow down or you can speed up the recording using the YouTube settings. So if you are an English language learner and you don't feel very competent with your language level, you can slow down and you can listen to me so you can capture each word. If instead you are a busy person, you process auditory information very quickly, you can actually make this go faster. You can also add auto-generated subtitles. If I'm able to speak, let's say I'm able to enunciate my words carefully, then the AI system that's part of YouTube will be able to capture my words and turn them into self-generated subtitles in English, which then can be turned into subtitles in other languages. You can stop the video. You can listen again if there was something you didn't catch. You can click on the hyperlinks that are going to be offered down in the captions. You can comment in real time. You can also comment later on the recording, and you will also get responses from either other viewers, directly from me, from people at Europass. And you can also decide to watch it in chunks. You might say, well, for me, it's much better to watch it 5 minutes, and then I need to take some notes in order to process what I'm learning. Or perhaps while you're listening, you might even want to use some sketching. Some of our students really love to use sketch notes or just to kind of draw these very small concepts in order to make it a bit more digestible for them. Or you might decide to develop a kind of mind map or a spider map where you might take the main idea of UDL and then have all of these different offshoots, because that's how you learn better. So this is just an example of all of the ways that there is some aspect of universal design already in what we're doing. Think about it. When we lecture in our classroom, the students can listen to us and watch us. But how many times have we had students who, for example, may have had some auditory processing difficulties? So what happens is they hear your voice, but they also hear the scratching of the chair on the floor. They might hear other noises outside in the hallway. They hear the sound of a pen scratching, and these are all in some way distractions, and there is no way that the student can hit rewind. And so even the idea of making video recordings of the most important aspects of the lessons that aspects of the unit that we are going to be working on with the students, and uploading them on the learning system, giving them an opportunity to go back and listen to them, is an example of a more universal design to the learning. So maybe you're already doing some of these things. Are you getting curious? And we're starting to get some friends coming in. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm happy to see you. And so as we are moving on, I just want to think about this idea of accessibility. Accessibility and design, they kind of live under this same umbrella. They live under the same umbrella that's called inclusion. And inclusion is obviously something that our schools are being asked to do more and more of, and to do a better job at. Different countries throughout the EU are in different, let's say that they're all being required by law to have more and more inclusive education. There are some countries that have had inclusive education for decades, and there are other countries who have had a kind of a hybrid model where they've had, for example, they've had special education that was happening alongside what we would call mainstream education, perhaps in the same building, but where you would have children who had special needs. They would be separated from their from their other peers, and they would work in separate areas. In some countries, there were also special schools, which have slowly over time been closed in order to bring these children into mainstream schools. And so we have lots of teachers who received an excellent training at the university, but they did not really receive much training on how to really include diverse types of learners. And what happens is we might get all kinds of papers and documents and different diagnoses and different requests for accommodations. And what is happening is many teachers are like, okay, well, this is how I usually teach. And then once we've prepared the lesson, we need to go back and kind of retrofit. And retrofit means I need to adapt what I already have planned to my student with dyslexia, or to the student who, for example, for my student who has some type of a physical disability, and I wanted to take the students outside and do something that would require using movement. Or it might be something where we have students with some type of a neurodiversity, and they don't necessarily tolerate a lot of noise, or they don't necessarily tolerate a lot of touch. And so what we would often be doing is spending time thinking, oh, wait, how can I adapt to this? How can I do something a little different? And this is something that takes a lot of time. And universal design for learning is a way to actually help us think about things in a certain way from the very beginning. Think about how we can approach as many learners as possible. So the idea is that we would try to think of ourselves as kind of designing for a road trip. So we are on a road trip where we know that we are going to a certain destination. The destination could be something like, I would like for my students to learn how to do long division. Or the destination of my road trip might be that I would like for my students to know all about, how World War I began, or something connected to, the geography of North America. In any case, what happens is we're thinking about the different needs of our students. And the first thing that we can do in order to incorporate more universal design is to get to know our learners. So getting to know our learners is actually quite exciting. And as a matter of fact, I would like to ask you, all of you who are watching or who will be watching, what kind of learner are you? What kind of learning tends to capture your attention? Or what kind of, let's say, teaching captures your attention? Do you notice that when you really seem to focus and you really seem to be able to chew on and digest information that you're learning, when you think back to when you were a teen, when you were a child, or even now as an adult, what are your preferred ways to learn? Do you need to learn by watching someone do something and then you try it yourself? Do you learn best by seeing different graphs and different representations that will take information and put it in a bit more of a graphic content, or even using images? Do you learn best by listening and then being able to draw pictures of what you're hearing? Do you learn best by first trying something and then learning about why you did it? And so while we're here, just mention in the chat if there's anything in particular. How is it that you tend to learn? And so I see some of my friends here. I'm so happy that you're here. And so we have Pit Petrebas, and I'm sure I am not saying your name right, but I hope you'll forgive me. Maths working sheets students to work together with me. Yes. Do we have anyone who also tends to be a learner, for example, that you need to connect things like role plays, that you have to act something out, or that you need to have class discussions and it tends to really stick with you? And in Universal Design for Learning, the whole idea is that we are going to actually spend time at the beginning of the year trying to get to know these learners. And the ways that we can do that, there are lots of different ideas. You can, for example, think about yourself, like we're doing right now. What is your professional identity? And then what is your personal identity? And this is a sort of intersection of these different parts of you. So, for example, if I were to think about my professional identity as, my professional identity is as a professional counselor, where I work with clients on some type of momentary difficulty that they're having in their lives. And then I'm also a teacher trainer where I work with teachers from the EU, and we have experiences together. I facilitate having a kind of collaborative learning experience. And I also would say that this really intersects a lot with my personal identity, which is as someone who is originally from North America, from the United States, who has lived in Italy for many, many years and is working in the context of the European Union and beyond. And how this feeling like very much like a global citizen is a big part of my personal identity. And so what will happen in the last question is, how do I learn best? Well, I'm interested in language-based learning. I'm interested in words. I'm interested in people. I really come alive around people. So talking to them, listening to them, observing them. And I also tend to really remember when my emotions get involved in what I'm doing. Then, the experience and the emotion just really sears things together in my memory. Especially if it's a strong emotion, which could be a very pleasant one, or it could even be slightly unpleasant, like, I don't know, feeling a bit of compassion when when I'm learning about a time in history where people really struggled. Or maybe I might even feel something like frustration because I'm trying so hard to learn. And this frustration is kind of like a flame that gets me going. And it actually, when I achieve what I want to achieve, I get excited. And so I see a few things here. Content-based learning is better. And would you like to tell me more about what you mean when you say content-based? What is it that can you give any of our viewers an example of how that works for you? So, This particular something that I would like to bring your attention to is that a lot of the inspiration that I got personally from Universal Design for Learning was based on a course that we offer at Europass that was designed by my dear colleague Marta Mandolini, and it's called We Are All Special. And this course, I highly recommend it because it does help these teachers who are really not that accustomed to thinking in terms of inclusion, and they wind up having to retrofit their lessons. And basically, inclusion, when we're thinking about how we are all special, we know that we are all special in the sense that we may have students in our classroom who are neurodiverse, and which is means that there's a unique way that each person's brain has developed. And in neurodiversity, we have students, for example, with ADHD. We have students who are on the autism spectrum. This also includes students with dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And so basically, neurodiversity is a way that the brain works that it doesn't change over time. It's something that is the way the brain works. And then, of course, we learn because students who are neurodiverse are in a world that is biased towards neurotypicals. And so what often happens is they need to learn all different kinds of adaptations. And then it can be people with different types of learning disorders, people with physical disabilities, differently abled people. We have psychological disorders. Okay, we have, as we've talked about in other videos, many students who have a diagnosis of different kinds of disorders: anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder. And these are all things that they bring into the classroom and that can affect their learning. And we also have non-native speakers of the local language. So we, in a case where a child has moved from another country, whether by choice or because they are refugees, because they have immigrated and they are in a situation where they may have, in their own language, an enormous capacity to express themselves, but it's not the same in this new language. And so they do have special needs at that moment. We also, under this umbrella of special, something that we also need to think about is that sometimes we are simply going through a moment. You may have a student whose parents are going through a particularly nasty divorce. And so this child is much less able to focus because they are under a certain amount of stress and distress, and their mind is elsewhere. And in that moment, they are also special. You might have some students who are simply, maybe they are being bullied. Okay. And so they have some relational difficulties at school, and they also can be a bit special. So the idea is not so much that we have to make room for these very particular cases with diagnoses. It's imagining that at any moment we are going to have students that are not necessarily able to learn in the, say, traditional way. Okay. So the origins here of Universal Design for Learning, for any of you who don't know about it, if you go on CAST.org, the Center for Applied Special Technology, it's a great website, and there is a lot of details about how UDL can look. David H. Rose was a developmental neuropsychologist and one of the co-founders, and together they put together information from cognitive neuroscience and education in order to create this flexible, inclusive approach to teaching and learning. Now, UDL originally comes from universal design in architecture. And one of the best examples of that is, for example, when they created, for example, those dips in the sidewalk. So you could go towards a crosswalk, for example. And okay, that's made for someone, for example, who needs a wheelchair to move. But it's also great for anyone who is dragging a suitcase, or it's great for a parent who is pushing their baby buggy, the little baby carriage. It's also great if someone's on a skateboard, if someone is using roller skates. It's like those ramps going up into a public building. It's something that was made for people perhaps with a physical disability, but in the end, it benefits many people. So this is the idea where it came from. And so um, like we said, one of the most important things we can do is getting to know our students. In the beginning of the year, we can create surveys. This can be something that is very simple. We can use a very simple tool like Google Forms. We could, for our students, for example, who have difficulty actually writing, they could use speech to text technology, for example, for their answers. Students could also manipulate different objects to show what it is that, for example, they enjoy. What is their favorite thing to do when they're not in school? What are the things that they're interested in? And you can do activities like, here's an idea, something that I've done with some of my teachers is, what kind of learner am I? And it can be a portrait, okay? And this is something that you can then post on the wall, and it's where the students would be able to like kind of even see how what they think is normal. Okay, they think that it's absolutely normal to what did I do here? It's absolutely normal for them to prefer learning in a certain way. What happens is they realize that it's not the same for everyone. And it gives you information, and it also gives the student this feeling of, well, they get that self-reflection, and they realize that the way they learn is something that's embraced in the classroom. Another thing that we can do is reflect on, you can ask your students to reflect, the older ones in particular, is what stayed with me from last year? Or when did I feel particularly engaged last year? Or what types of activities really stayed with me? Because this allows your student to reflect on what works for them while giving you information. And it's fun. It's fun for them. It generates all kinds of positive memories of school. And we can use this information even when we're talking about things in class, like saying, hey, and Jenny, it's like last year when you used the Lego to represent, how we could, redesign the school gym. And you can make references to it. This really reinforces this idea that they are seen and that they are important. We could also put together a strengths-based profile. And this might look like a place where the learner would fill out their student profile, where they would put things like, I tend to learn best when, or I need to work on this, or my goal for this year is this. What I think would be important for you, teacher, to know about me is. And if you have younger learners, you can have the parents fill this out. You could ask them, and once again, it could be a very simple Google form. It could be an email, whatever works in and makes sense for you and your school. Asking them to send you something, an email in which they explain what they think would be important for you to know about their child. Now, I understand that not all parents would respond. However, it still would be a great way to start creating that bridge. Then we have ideas like skills lineup. Very simple. You could even put the students in a line down the corridor, and you could say things like, "I learn best when I see pictures." And they could line up on this imaginary line going from 1 to 10, 1 being, "No, that's not my preferred way," and 10 being, "That is my preferred way." Or it could be things like, when I'm not in school, I love to dance. And then, just trying to get an idea of what their interests are, and so they can see what's interesting to everyone else. There could be different learning style stations. Even taking a book from Howard Gardner's Multiple Intelligences, you might even decide that you're going to talk about fractions, and you are going to have different stations in the room where children, groups of 5, are going to work on fractions. Maybe in one corner, they're going to manipulate blocks, okay? Or, we were talking about Lego or things that would represent these different fractions. Maybe in another station, they would actually work on fractions using numbers, using digits, okay? There might be another one where they would need to represent them in using, drawing pictures of pies or drawing pictures of whatever it is that would make sense to them. And there might be even another section where they need to get together and solve a problem together by collaborating and talking to a partner. In this way, fractions, they're working on them in different ways. And this is going to stimulate the interest of at least every student is going to find at least one thing that speaks to them more. And this is an example of using a universal design. Any questions about that? It could be really fun to have the students teach the teacher something new. That could be like an activity that they do. Maybe every week you might have a student where they come in and they're going to teach the teacher, or they're going to teach the class something new, something that they're kind of specialties at. And everyone can show their competence in some way. They could also, when you have done an activity or you have learned something with them, you've gotten into some new information or some new skills, it's always a great idea to debrief on some level. Now, the debriefing, it could be done in pairs. It could be done in a collective group. It could be done where the teacher is then kind of scribbling on the board like a mind map all of the feedback that's coming in. And so their thoughts and their words are becoming visible. You could use something like Mentimeter or some type of an app that would help them express it anonymously and then be able to see all of their different thoughts and ideas expressed. Students could hold up some type of a different color based on if they enjoyed something, if they didn't enjoy it. They could hold up a number if they are nonverbal. Thinking about all of these different things before you go into the classroom means that you will be ready for whatever, almost whatever comes your way. It will not necessarily reach the needs of every single learner, but you're going to have a big possibility of reaching as many as possible. And this idea that, yes, EFL NATO says, what about dividing pizza in class? Exactly. What about making pizza? That would be really over the top, but how they would never forget it. Can you believe one of my biggest memories in school? I have a couple of them. I don't remember a lot from school, but one of my biggest memories was in my second grade class. So I was 7. We made chocolate. Well, we didn't, we made chocolate and then we warmed it up and then we poured it into molds. And I thought it was the best thing ever. And then the other thing that I remember from second grade is we wrote letters to the President of the United States. We wrote letters. We didn't really know who he was, of course. And I won't tell you who he was because that would really reveal my age. But in any case, we wrote to the president. And this way, the teacher taught us how to write a formal letter. And we had to use our best handwriting, and we had to put the address, and we had to put the date and write, "Dear Mr. President." And then we wrote and we learned how to start a letter, how to greet this person, how to end the letter. And you know what the best part was? Is that we all got a response. We all got a response. I never forgot it. Now, if the teacher had just said, "Now practice writing a letter," I don't know if it would have been quite as exciting. Okay. But this fact that it was meaningful was so exciting. And when we think about universal design, once again, instead of retrofitting a typical lesson, well, we start with just assuming that all of our learners learn differently, whether they have a diagnosis of something or they don't. So it is true that it could take some time to get used to this planning, but with practice, it gets a lot quicker. And there are going to be, as I mentioned, some very specific accommodations that might be necessary, but you're already thinking in a way that is much more inclusive. And so it's going to eliminate a lot of that extra work. Then, there are certain principles that universal design for learning follows. And so with the information that you've gathered about these learners, you can organize this lesson and use some AI to help you. Now, anyone who's worked with me knows that I am not particularly high tech. And actually, I tend to really encourage teachers to think about ways to keep our kids. I say that what used to be normal in their lives outside of the classroom, playing outside, going over to each other's houses, meeting for an ice cream, all of these things that were much more common. Now, school is becoming a place where we actually have to make sure, as I say, we've gone from be quiet and sit down and sit still to, stand up, move, and talk. And the fact, though, that I am a bit low tech in the classroom doesn't mean that I can't benefit from using AI many times as an idea generator, as kind of, giving me a jump start on some of my brainstorming some ideas. It's my brainstorming buddy. But AI is also a huge help for teachers in trying to imagine how they can approach a lesson with a universal design in mind. So, for example, the few that I use, and I'm sure anyone who's watching has even better ideas than I have. But some of my favorites are things like using ChatGPT or Claude AI as a way to generate multiple forms of engagement, which we will see more about, of engagement, of representation and expression. There's an app that's called Napkin that does a very nice job in transforming text into graphics. So we might explain something with our voices. We might also give the students, perhaps we might give them something to read or a video to watch. And then we might also take this information that I'm saying using a lot of words and pop it into Napkin, and Napkin will create some kind of a graphically organized visual with less words, but that will kind of give our students that information, especially the ones who cannot process a lot at the same time. And let's be honest, you might not be a person that has a diagnosis of some sort, but if you haven't slept well the night before, or you have a lot on your mind, you can't process a lot of information at the same time either. And having things sort of graphically organized on certain days might be exactly what you need. So we might use Canva. Canva, even the free version has lots of, I mean, you can make amazing infographics. They're very colorful, they're very fun. You can make posters, videos, presentations. The kids, of course, are great at this, and they can use these tools also to transform their learning and as a form of expression of what they've learned. Suno is a lot of fun for, of course, transforming content into music for our more musically inclined. And so, what kinds of AI tools do you like? I'm wondering. Yes, Google Music Lab. Yes, thank you. That's a good one. And yes, please share whatever it is that gets you excited. And as my colleague Verl Panet, who we will have an interview with her coming up in the next 2 weeks, and as she says, it's not important. You don't need to know about all of these tools. You just need to know about a few of them and get comfortable using them as a way to make life easier for you. Then the first principle of UDL is multiple forms of engagement. So when we think about multiple forms of engagement, what we mean by this is we mean how. It's the how of UDL. How do we engage with our learners? Now, this is what when we get information about them, then we know how we can connect with them. And so it's all about welcoming different interests, the intersection of their identities. The engagement could be as simple as that we would use a few words from everyone's native language when we were learning something new, just to sort of make them feel seen. Sometimes in my Europass courses, we do that where we will, when I need to divide the group into two different groups or something and put them in pairs. And so we'll learn how to count in one of the participants' languages. And it's always a very nice Erasmus moment because people have the opportunity to hear how incredibly diverse and rich these languages are across this continent. And it's a way to engage them. It's a surprising thing. It's kind of fun. And it makes the person who is the speaker of that language feel kind of important in that moment. This is a way to engage and include. You could also, the idea is the focus in UDL is that we're going to be encouraging effort and the child's or the teen's persistence. So it's not so much about doing things objectively right or perfectly and getting a perfect score or getting an A, but that we are going to use different models of assessment that are going to help them see also like where their effort is going and how their persistence is leading them. It's not so important in a UDL classroom that everyone is treated the same or that everyone gets to the same goal. The idea is that everyone takes the steps that are possible for them, but that they are taking them and that is celebrated. And we also really want to stimulate their emotional capacity, their self-awareness, their social awareness. And these, for example, if we were to think about applying multiple means of engagement, and we were to think about this, like the why we are doing this, and say you're trying to teach your students English, and you can use things that are culturally relevant, using culturally diverse materials to reflect the students' backgrounds. You want to make it relatable. You could make different choices of activities. How interesting is it for students to even just be given 2 choices? Would you like to do this, or would you like to do that? Or, somehow bringing in two different kinds of assignments, things that are going to be based on their interests. There can be different interactive tools, and as we talked about, and very clear objectives, especially for our students that really need to keep track of their progress. And then we move on to multiple means of representation. Okay. And multiple forms, multiple means of representation is basically just, it's the way we tend to perceive and make meaning of information. So once again, this is going into, if you have students with sensory disabilities, if there's blindness or deafness, of course, how are we going to represent that? Or maybe just simply for students who, once again, have a little difficulty with their auditory processing, students who are distracted by the many noises, they have difficulty filtering out the different noises. Students, maybe they are not necessarily, they don't have a diagnosis of blindness, but they are in the back of the room. They don't yet realize that they are, nearsighted, and they are having difficulty seeing the board. And so just once again, thinking about things universally, changing the font, making sure that there's not too much text, for example, on a page. And of course, different learning disabilities with dyslexia and dysgraphia, and also representing diverse or non-dominant cultures. Even in your videos, in your choices of images that you're going to use in slide presentations, it's wonderful if you can incorporate all kinds of people of different sizes, shapes, different skin tones, different skin colors, people who have, let's say, that where you can see kind of outwardly that that there might be some type of a physical disability. We can also talk about the fact that there are such things as hidden disabilities. And that is also a big thing, because people who have so-called hidden disabilities often feel like they have to fight very hard. A hidden disability can be something like deafness. And it can also be something like ADHD, where it's just not that clear to people, but it is something that makes you a different kind of learner. Then in multiple means of representation, so how would we customize what we're representing? How would we highlight these different things? Do they need to use a certain kind of paper? Do you want that one student who has difficulty with, for example, dyslexia, there might be certain kinds of printed notebooks, certain kinds of paper. But is it important to limit that use only to that student? Or is this something that we make available in general to the class? Because simply, first of all, to not single out that one child, but also as a way, maybe someone actually would learn a bit better using that. Language and symbols that we would use, even with numbers, the way we might represent numbers. And some people have a little difficulty with the actual number, and they need things that they can manipulate, or they need to actually see the word for 1 or 2 in order to really understand connect with it. And then, of course, building knowledge, connecting to prior knowledge, and identifying certain patterns. This might look like, for example, in an English language classroom, where you're learning English as a foreign language. Once again, using pictures, infographics, diagrams, videos. You could have glossaries. You could have the good old dictionary. They can use different translation tools that are just as simple as so many things that are offered now. They could even be speech to text in different languages, text to speech, so they could hear the pronunciation. These things didn't exist before. And if you were trying to learn how to pronounce something in English and you were coming across this word, You had to go look in the dictionary and look for the phonetic writing, and it meant that you had to understand what phonetic writing even was. And now you can just consult it. You could hear it over and over again. You can reformulate that sound. It's amazing. And there can be audio recordings, though, that you make yourself. There can be different dialogues, lessons that students can replay at their own pace. And again, I one time had the great privilege of tutoring a 13-year-old boy who did not have a diagnosis of any kind, but it was evident. And this was 20 years ago, before Italian schools were, let's say, they were that aware of these different kinds of learning difficulties. And I would say that there was definitely some dyslexia and some dysgraphia. And all this child heard throughout his schooling was pay attention and why are you so messy? And him being absolutely ashamed to ever have to read out loud in class. Can you imagine what it was like for him to then learn English, which is a very opaque language? You're looking at this word and already it is pronounced completely differently. And I remember saying to him, can you ask the teacher if you could just use a recorder and record the lesson, because it's too hard for you to take notes during the lesson. He couldn't do both. He couldn't listen and take notes. It was just impossible for him. Also, because on top of his processing that was not so easy, what came out of his hand was often illegible. And I remember just saying that, because we would often record my lessons with him so he could then listen to them again. The teacher said at the time, absolutely not. Think about how far we've come, and think about how many of your students can benefit from this. The ones who maybe didn't sleep very well, or who tend to daydream, who maybe for whatever reason are a bit distracted that day. I'm not saying that it's an excuse to not pay attention in class, but it is an additional resource for them. Things like, of course, when we talked about real life contexts, writing the letter to the president or making chocolate, anytime that we would do things like where we go out and do some community work, when kids go out and just pick up litter in the riverbed of your city, and this whole conversation that can start about science, that can start about being more civic minded, that can be about wildlife, and can also be about science and the science of things like recycling and getting more into sustainability. So and you're going to have some students who would absolutely fall asleep if you talk about those things in class. But if you give them a trash bag and, give them some rubber gloves, and they will feel like they're doing something meaningful and will be more curious. And this is just another example of how we can represent things in different ways. And then the multiple forms of action and expression. So learners who are interacting with the environment in different ways. Multimedia tools, once again, setting meaningful goals and having a plan for challenges. Even the student can also think about what is challenging for me and what helps me in that moment. What do I need in order to get over this challenge? And this might look like, there's all kinds of flexible assignments, written responses, oral presentations. One student I know, the students needed to create a tutorial about something in order to use the English language. And this kid was not that interested in English. He found it very boring. And he had a lot of difficulty, for example, learning things like to use the different first, second, and third conditional properly. He had a terrible time with the irregular verbs, but he really loved to look good. He had a really great style, and he always had a really interesting haircut, and his clothes were always on point. And so he did a whole tutorial that was on how to shave properly without getting any razor burn, okay? Even in the hard to reach places around the nose and up the neck. And would you believe the students were given the option to actually record it at home, but instead he wanted to do it live. He brought the shaving cream, he brought the basin of water, he brought the razor, he brought a mirror and a towel tucked in, and he did this all in English. And he was kind of an actor at heart, and this was a transformative experience in his relationship to English. And this wasn't a kid who had a particular diagnosis, but he was a kid that really needed to learn by doing. And then for the other kids, in watching him do that, they were much more engaged in what was going on. So these are just some examples of thinking a bit outside the box. Once again, they can use technology, assistive technology, to express themselves in the way that works best. And of course, things like different aspects of peer collaboration. For a student like me, where I just loved talking to people, and I would get in trouble for it. And then I would be sent to go sit by myself. And instead, how wonderful was it on those days when we could work in pairs, when we could work in groups of 3? For other kids, it might not be the greatest. So teachers can plan the lesson thinking, great, you students can choose, you guys can choose. Those of you who want to work in pairs can work in pairs. Those of you who want to work individually can work individually. This is already something that's with a more universal design. Or it could be, those who want to, write something, or those who want to act it out, or those who want to, represent it by taking pictures and creating a sort of a collage. Why not? The idea is that they all would be able to express themselves in a way that was meaningful to them, not that we would have 25 of the exact same thing. So you can see where, yes, it could be a bit more work in the beginning, but you could wind up having a whole toolkit of ideas and a way of looking at your lessons that becomes a habit. And it's not so much of, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? So again, universal design for learning, the big guidelines. I would encourage you to go on cast.org. I will write that right here. Cast.org, which is full of great information about how you can make this happen. When I talked about some of the maybe not so much disadvantages, the difficulties of UDL is that teachers can easily get overwhelmed and feel like, I can't do all this. And I hope in this talk, you've been able to find ideas, first of all, that you're already doing, things that are actions that you're doing right away, and you didn't even realize that you were universally using universal design. And it's also hopefully some ideas to give you a little more courage. And if you are already doing some of these things, please include, tell us about what you're doing in the comments. And if you try any of these ideas, let us know how they worked. When I said that for some teachers, it can seem overwhelming, again, think like you kind of have some special needs when you're trying something new. And so go with what is possible for you. Small, specific, sustainable steps that will enable you to reach more of your students. And so you also are going to feel more self-efficacy, more connection, and more motivated. Okay. Thank you so much for being here today. And I will be back in 2 weeks with an interview with the wonderful Verl Ponnet in talking about the EU AI Act, all about artificial intelligence in Europe. And so I hope that you will enjoy that. And if you've enjoyed this, please hit the subscribe button. please hit like and share with anyone that you think might benefit from some of this information, this content. Thank you again, and I'll see you soon.